Hello, 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 good evening and welcome to the Tortoise newsroom. There are some people that haven't been here before. There are some people that have been here lots of times. There are some people that work here. And welcome to everybody who is watching at home. My name is Liz Mosley, I'm an editor here, and I am thrilled and delighted that I got picked to be the one to edit this ThinkIn with the very extremely wonderful and important Caroline Criado Perez, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! Yes! Woo, woo, indeed. I just want to apologise. I brought a particular pair of shoes to wear this evening and have not put them on, so I'm in my sweaty Birkenstocks. I apologise. I'm letting the side down, but just pretend, or just not sweaty Birkenstocks, you know, like actual shoes. So I'm sorry about that. I want to start this evening, for those of you who haven't been to a ThinkIn before, the idea is that everybody gets to join in. We'll talk about the work that Caroline does. We'll talk a bit about invisible women. We'll talk about visible women, which of course is a podcast that she's been doing with the team here at Tortoise. And if you listen to it, there's lots and lots of things to say about it, new learnings and all kinds of stuff. So, but I want to start off by asking a very particular question.
Oh dear.
To our assembled friends here and Caroline too.
Not to me, that's fine.
Don't panic,
Ask
it's
them
all good.
the questions.
Can you please raise your hand if you have pockets in the outfit which you are wearing? Ooh, really good. Raise your hand if you do not have pockets. Sad for us.
Well, look, the first mistake you're making is you're not abiding by my no pocket, no purchase policy. And I really feel that after this week's episode,
it was this week, yeah.
Yeah, I feel, what are you
We
doing?
need to roll that out as a campaign.
Yeah.
I purchased this dress before I got married, and I was married for 10 years and I am now divorced. So that gives you a sense of the wear, cost per wear is really good of this particular outfit.
So maybe it's time to put this dress out to pasture.
Yeah, it should be, and for lots of reasons.
or put pockets in the dress.
Tell us about the feminist political history of pockets. It's a thing, it's a total thing.
Apologies for my very useless friend who's just turned up late. Thank you. I went to see this comedian. It's nothing to do with pockets. It was a male comedian, so he probably had pockets. And these people turned up 20 minutes late, and he roasted them for, which I'm not going to do now. But I did, but she didn't get me my Kirby grips in time. So anyway, what was the question?
Feminist political history
Right,
of pockets.
yes. Feminist political history of pockets. It's actually very, very interesting. And if you want to know about it, you should probably listen to the wonderful episode that we put together. But just to give you a little taster, basically, women didn't used to have pockets integrated into their clothes. They used to have what we now called tie-on pockets, what they just called pockets. And these pockets were enormous. Women have never seen the like, at least women of this era. They were so big they needed organisation systems. They had like bottles in there, lunch in there. But gradually, the tie-on pockets kind of died out, I guess, along with women's fashions. So clothes became like a bit more form-fitting. And men ended up having lots and lots of pockets in their clothes. But for women, the pockets did not transfer into the clothes. And one of the really interesting things, we spoke to a pocket historian, which is a real job. And she said that like it's very hard to prove, you know, the cause behind the loss of women's pockets. But there's like a very interesting coincidence of timing between the loss of women's pockets and the gaining of some women's rights. So as women were starting to gain the vote, they started to lose their pockets. And there's like some really funny stuff about men were like really suspicious of women's pockets. They're like, what does she keep in there? Which they're like really big and I can't see in them and I don't like it. So there's a sort of slight conspiracy theory, which I think is just a great theory, that men are the reason women do not have pockets. And I feel like men should probably get over the fact that we have the vote now. So maybe we can have our pockets back. Yeah. And that is the political history of pockets. So my no pocket, no purchase stance is also a political stance, because I believe in women's right to the vote and women's right to pockets.
Equivalently.
Please vote for me.
Important. Yeah, I think we probably would. So it's all been quite jolly so far, Caroline, but I am a great believer in the cathartic power of two things. Number one, a snarky underline, and number two, just some rage. And we're going to have some rage now, because there are so many rage-making findings in your book, Invisible Women, and in the podcast, although the podcast is talking about solutions too. I've picked my own particular rage-making thing that I think is illustrative. What is important about your work is that you're engaged in data and true facts. And in the process of revealing those facts, you lay bare the sort of overwhelming and entirely frustrating nature of the headwinds, I suppose, of a world designed by men for men and against women. And there's a particular story, I think it is in the member exclusive bonus episode of last week. So last week was about car crashes and car safety. And then you talked to Dr. Tim Nutbeam about his research. That was the thing that really, really got to me. Just replay it for people who might not have heard that episode.
So there were two main features of that conversation. Well, three main features. The first one was in the main episode, which was his discovery, along with his research team, that in the event of a car crash, so as I'm sure everyone here knows, in the event of a car crash, women are much more likely to be seriously injured and much more likely to die than a man in the same car crash. And Dr. Nutbeam, Professor Nutbeam, I'm not sure. Do you have that in your notes?
It says doctor in my
Hannah,
notes, but...
any idea? Doctor. That's my wonderful producer, Hannah. He found that women are almost twice as likely as men to get trapped in a car in the event of a car crash. And this really matters for a number of reasons. For a start, why are women more likely to get trapped in the car? Has it got something to do with the design of the car? But what makes it really important is that people who get trapped in a car in the event of a crash have much worse outcomes than people who are able to leave the car. And so that was the first finding, which led him on to the second finding, which is the first we discussed in the bonus episode. And that is that, so in the event of trauma, so, basically you're bleeding a lot, there is a fantastic drug that you can be given that will help you survive. And it has great, it has a fantastic effect on survival rates. And it's called Tranexamic Acid, which took me a long time to learn how to pronounce. And it helps your blood to clot and stops the catastrophic bleeding that would lead to your death. But tranexamic acid is only effective if it's given within the first 3 hours. And the earlier that you give it, the more effective it is. And it's very difficult at the moment to give someone tranexamic acid if they're stuck in a car, because the only way currently to deliver tranexamic acid is via a drip. And it's very difficult to put a drip in a person who is traumatized and also stuck in a car. So is this one of the reasons that women are more likely to die following a car crash because they're stuck in a car and we can't give them the life-saving treatment? More research needs to be done, but it's certainly a potential reason. And so he wants to see about how they could deliver tranexamic acid to people in a car. So apparently it can be delivered via an injection, kind of like an EpiPen. And he wants, police officers and fire rescue services to be given these EpiPens. I forgot to tell you the main finding, which is that women are half as likely as men to receive tranexamic acid.
There we go.
So, sorry. But it's not just because women get trapped in cars. This also happens when women have had a trauma as a result of any other kind of injury. So one of the things that's really interesting about trauma is that the way doctors are taught about trauma and trained in trauma tends to be that they're taught that your prototypical trauma victim is a young man. This is Dr. Nutbeam's words, a young man probably done something stupid with his friends. I did not say that. So that's kind of what you're taught. Those are the case studies you're given. And so that's kind of what doctors are looking out for. But actually, the prototypical trauma victim now is an older woman who's had a fall in her home. And what the research that they did found was that women are about half as likely as men to receive life-saving tranexamic acid, irrespective of the extent of their bleeding, so like how bad their trauma is. So at all levels of severity of bleeding, women are much less likely than men to receive this life-saving treatment. And so, you know, is that because of, like, we don't know why that is. Is it because doctors are seeing little old lady probably can't really be as injured? We don't know. So he wants to look into that. But the thing that made me really angry, it sounds like the thing that made you really angry, was the thing I'm about to say. Yeah. Okay, so this is what got me really, really angry. As if I wasn't angry enough. This podcast has been really bad for my blood pressure. So he said, so we kind of wrapped up the interview, and Hannah said, as she always does, because I always forget to ask this, so is there anything that you think we've missed, anything you'd like to tell us? And he was like, well, actually, there is something. And it's this. It was really hard to get both of these papers published. No journal wanted to publish them. So for the entrapment study, he said that, I think he said he had a desk reject, which is basically like you don't even get to like the peer review stage. They're just like, no, this isn't of interest to us. And the thing that was interesting about that is that A, he's published in that journal many times before, never had a problem until he decided to sex disaggregate his data. And also he said that like a year beforehand, they had published, the same journal published a very similar study looking at age disaggregated data. So are older people more likely to be trapped in the event of a car crash? So interested when it comes to thinking about if it's older people, not interested when it comes to thinking about if it's women. And let's bear in mind, this is a huge difference, right? Nearly twice as likely. It's a massive finding. And you know, he did manage to find a journal to publish it, and they were right to publish it because it was reported in the news because it's a huge finding. So I'm sure his university is very happy because he's got the ref or whatever. Anyway, that's a side note. But he also struggled to publish the tranexamic acid paper. And that paper did get to peer review stage, but it was rejected. And basically the peer reviewers just kept saying, I just don't really see why this is interesting. Which is just staggering. It's very interesting that doctors are not giving women life-saving treatment and that they are half as likely to get this life-saving treatment. So they had to really, really fight. And the thing that's really concerning about that is, for me, I sort of feel, well, how much of a chilling effect is there for academics who have to publish in order to get permanent positions? You know, publishing is the whole deal in academia. If you don't publish, you won't get a job. And so if they know that journals are going to look at their sex disaggregated research and just be like, don't think this is very important or interesting, then of course they're not going to do it because this is their career and they need to put food on the table. So that made me furious. And it's something we want to look into further.
Caroline, one of the things that is striking when I listen to the podcast, you get it in the book too, because of the way that you write, but you can really hear it, literally in the podcast, is that your spirit is sort of irrepressible, chirpy. You know, it's fun and engaging, and I don't just mean the pockets one, which is a bit of a silly one, but there's you get a sense of,
when you
car crash to pocket
that
vibe.
made you really angry. I was like, it's going to be the pocket.
But how, when your job is literally to go systematically around the world and find evidence of how women are not just disadvantaged but often endangered because of often purposeful omission and deliberate decisions, how do you stay upbeat?
How do I stay upbeat? Well, I don't always stay upbeat. I get really angry sometimes, often. I get really angry. I suppose the thing for me is to feel like I'm doing something to fix it. And if I feel like I'm doing something to fix it, then you don't feel helpless. You feel like you're being proactive, and that always makes me feel better. I get angry and unhappy if I feel like there's nothing I can do. But if you feel there's something you can do, then there's a purpose, and you're taking your rage and you're turning it into something, and that makes the rage more manageable.
My sense when your book came out, just as a punter who bought it and read it, was that, and quite well-known responses to it, it felt like oxygen for women who sort of encounter this stuff a lot of the time, but you encounter so much of it, you sort of forget to notice it, and then you're really unpacking and laying plain. Were there any other more surprising responses to the work, to what Dr. Nutbeer encountered, which is we don't think it's very interesting? What was surprising about it?
I'll tell you one thing I didn't expect. I didn't expect women to start sending me selfies of them standing in the queue for the toilet. That was not an outcome that I had predicted. But nevertheless, it was an outcome that started pretty soon after. And it sadly stopped during the pandemic. But they've started trickling in again. And I'm sure that we're all very happy to be back in the queue for the toilet where we belong. So that surprised me. I suppose one other response that I hadn't really anticipated was feminists who felt very concerned about, you see, I did need the curvy grips. Thank you, Sarah. You're a very good friend. I'm sorry I roasted you. It was feminists who were concerned about me talking about sex differences. And they were concerned because there is a sort of strand of feminism that has gone down the route of there's no difference between men and women can do everything men can do, and that's how we get equality. And I really do understand that position, because women's bodies have historically been used against them to keep them out of the public space, right? There's the wandering womb. There's telling athletes your womb will fall out if you go for a run. You can't work if you've had a...
I still believe that one, actually, that's why. Not worth the risk.
Fair enough. So there is a sense of don't mention sex. They might not notice. But my research shows so clearly that by not talking about women's bodies, what you do is act like the male body is a gender-neutral body, and you design everything for the male body. And the fact is that female bodies do actually exist. And pretending that they don't exist harms women and leads to all the things that I write about in the book and that I talk about in the podcast. Things like women being much more likely to die in the event of a car crash, women being much more likely to die following a heart attack, women being much more likely to be misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, undertreated. The list is something like 400 pages long. So I hadn't really anticipated that. I probably should have, but I didn't really anticipate it. But I suppose those were the two: selfies and sex differences. Did
you ever approach a topic, thinking I'm going to explore what the sexist aggregated data tells us about this part of the world, and find yourself pleasantly surprised to think, oh, look, women aren't massively disadvantaged and endangered by this?
Well, sort of. So it's a very interesting outlier to the whole we only do research on men thing, and that is cosmetic surgery. Suddenly, when it comes to like anti-wrinkle treatment, women are everywhere. So the thing that's interesting about that is, well, the obvious is interesting about that we care about stopping women's wrinkles but not stopping their heart attacks. But more to the point, the excuses that you get when you speak to medical researchers, sports science researchers of like, why have you once again only included male subjects? And I say male because it's also animals and cells. And they say, first of all, well, the menstrual cycle might interfere with the results, Caroline. And I say, yes, I know that. And that's why you should study the female body. But apparently that doesn't matter when it comes to cosmetic treatment. Suddenly the menstrual cycle is fine. And the other thing that they say is like women are really difficult to recruit, but not when it comes to cosmetic. So maybe they should speak to the people who are doing the cosmetic trials to find out, where do you find the women?
Yeah.
We can't find the women.
Maybe they offer them wrinkle cream.
Maybe.
That's the incentive.
So, I mean, there is like a sort of serious point at the heart of that, which is, yes, women are slightly harder to recruit because they're very busy. And they've got things like children to look after and pick up from school and take to the doctor. You know, so one of the things that I wrote about in the book is how women do 75% of the world's unpaid care work. So that involves looking after children, it involves looking after older people, it involves doing all the household management, doing the cleaning. And so that takes up a lot of time and affects what women can fit into their day. But the answer to that really is to get more inventive. Like, for example, have you ever considered doing a trial and saying, if you do this trial, we'll offer you free childcare? Watch the women line up. They will be there. There's actually, just reminded me of quite a funny study that, it's not actually that funny, but I think it's funny. It was looking at, so the International Labour Organization, I think that's what it's called, ILO, says that you shouldn't work over, I think it's something like 48 hours a week. After that time, you will start to experience health problems. And that's true for men. For women, actually, the number is lower. And basically, women, after I think it's about 36 hours, start to experience increased like serious diseases like heart disease, cancer, that kind of stuff. But the thing that I found particularly interesting, this is the funny bit, because I appreciate that's not at all funny, is that for men, actually, working longer hours had a protective effect. And so you think, why is that? That women working long hours doesn't, and men, and my theory is that women, doesn't matter how many hours they spend in the office, they've still got to do all the unpaid care work. So you're just creating a massively long day. Whereas men, they stay in the office. They're just like, great, I don't have to do bath time. It's brilliant. And the reason that I think that that is the correct analysis are two studies. One, so for years, doctors were kind of baffled by women having much worse outcomes following heart bypass surgery to men. And then they looked into what happened when the patients went home. And when the men went home, they had someone looking after them. When the women went home, they carried on looking after everyone else. So they didn't get to recover. And then some of them died. And secondly, is one of my favorite ever studies, which is that there was this study done which found, I wish I could remember what country it was. It might be in the UK. Husbands create an extra 7 hours of housework per week for their wives compared to like before they got married.
By doing?
Being men.
I can see it.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you should ask the men, because I'm not a man and I have not created extra housework for my wife.
Yeah. No, me either. Where's James? Hi, James.
You're a man.
Would someone get a mic back? Oh. Maybe we should ask Kate. let's get a mic back to, this is James Harding and Kate. Hi, Kate.
Hi. It's couples therapy
It
with
is.
everyone. Yeah.
It's a safe space, James. Go on, tell us about your 7 hours.
Just the 7 hours. What am I doing? What is the stuff that I'm dropping on the floor-drobe that is making that particular problem happen? It's
I mean, hashtag not all men, James.
Oh, I see. So I'm going to go for the exemption case. I don't think that's a safe route,
It's a
Caroline.
serious point. There's a reason why I picked on James, which is it's mainly women here tonight, right? Mainly. Paul is here, James is here. But my sense is, as a man sitting in the audience and you're hearing all this stuff and you look around and there's not tons of men who've come to listen and learn about it, how does it play? Are you just a bit like, no, here we go again?
Firstly, it's fascinating. It's a little worrying when we get into those particular details. They feel a little close to home. and I think that so fun enough, the 7 hours doesn't ring true. Oh yes, I'm going to stay late, then I can skip bath time. That feels... Have you not spotted Sarah is nodding even as I'm speaking? And there are a fair few people who'll be nodding
Right.
because it's not just 7 hours, 14 hours. But I tell you what I did think right at the beginning, Liz, when you started talking, and it was because I did notice the fact that it's actually really striking how few men are here. When you framed at the beginning about a world designed by men for men against women, which is your phrase, I was like, actually, the thing that I found listening to Caroline's podcast is, where is the line between neglect, willful neglect, and a kind of industrial selfishness? And that's the thing I don't know. And I suppose I'm trying to get the blokes off the hook here, because I'm saying, look, a lot of it is men designing jeans with pockets for men and just not thinking. I'm not saying it's a brilliant excuse, but that's what I'm interested to know, Caroline, what you're talking about when you talk about, the extent to which, for example, scientific journals reject a certain kind of research. That feels willful to me.
Yeah.
When I think about pockets and patterns and behaviours, that feels like it's not willful, it's habit. And so I don't know where... I think distinction falls.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wrestle with this a lot. And when I wrote the book, I made a point of saying I'm actually not interested really in the motivations of the people who perpetuate the gender data gap, because when I wrote the book, that wasn't the point of the book. The point of the book was to present the evidence and say, this is happening. Here's my evidence. What are you going to do about it? And then I started doing events and people were like, well, what are you going to do about it? So yeah, I have thought about it quite a lot, because obviously with this podcast, we're trying to figure out how do we fix it. And if you want to know how to fix it, you have to know, well, what's really behind it? So definitely part of it is just this default male bias that we all share, where we think we're speaking gender neutrally and we're actually generally speaking about men. So that's part of it. When it came to the journals, that's why I got so angry about it, because I had kind of thought it was mainly researchers forgetting that women exist, or being so enthralled to the idea of the default male bias. Because one of the other excuses you get is like, well, we'll start off in men, and if we find anything interesting, then we'll move on to the subtype, aka women, aka 50% of the global population, And to me, that just screams default male, right? Because I once asked a researcher when he said that to me, I was like, well, why don't you start in women? And he was like, that's a very good question. And that was all he said. So it's definitely partly that. With the journals, I don't know. I mean, I intend to do an episode on this, and I want to go and ask them, because I want to know, why did you not think that this mattered? Because this is people dying. Why is that not interesting to you and your readers? You sort of asked me, how do I not get furious and depressed and keep going and that kind of stuff? And part of it is that I try to tell myself that it's not deliberate, generally. And that's very important for me to believe, because the alternative is just too awful. It's too awful. And I haven't met every single person in the world, but of the people I have met, it does feel to me like it is more the bias, not having thought of it side. But there is, where I don't think that we can let people off the hook, is that too often they find out about it and then they do nothing. So a classic example is, in fact, cars. We've known since the 80s about these statistics of women being more likely to die, more likely to be seriously injured. So why haven't we fixed it? Like, that's my entire lifetime. We've known this and no one has done anything. And this wonderful woman that we interviewed for the car episode, Maria, got into this awful car crash, nearly died. She had this terrible, terrible injury, and her injury was 100% a result of them not having designed seatbelts using a female pelvis. And she, having suffered these terrible injuries, woman after my own heart, decides, I'm going to campaign on this. And she has made her life now about campaigning to fix this. And she's gone and she's spoken to all sorts of people, you know, manufacturers of cars, of dummies, and lawmakers. And she's managed to get into meetings with lawmakers, and they have told her it's just a matter of economics. So that's not, at that stage, it's not that you don't know, it's that you don't care.
What about contraception? Do you think, no, we've had this debate in here, we've had it a fair bit, which is what's the reason for the expectation of women to take responsibility for contraception? Is that an industrial bias, or is that's the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting one. I mean, historically, I guess it's because women have been seen as the ones who have to do with children, and so obviously they're going to be the ones to do with contraception. But I think it is a bit more complicated than that, because the thing is, pregnancy happens to women. So, of course, we are going to be the ones who are more concerned about preventing it happening, because it's our bodies it's going to happen to. So it's not that I think we shouldn't try and develop contraception for men, but do I think that if I were having a one-night stand and a man told me, by the way, I'm on the male pill, that I'd be like, oh, great, brilliant, let's not use a condom? No. I'm married, and I think my husband's watching this. I'm not having one-night stands, just to be clear. But if that were the case, right, I'd be interested in a show of hands. Women, whether you're single or not, would you trust a man that you don't really know, and you're, you know, they're all shaking their heads, right? Because we don't trust you. So I think that's part of it. And I think that in sort of long-term relationships, the calculus is different. And definitely we could and should be developing better contraception, or any contraception, actually, that men can make use of. But yeah, I think it's a bit more complicated when it comes to that.
Thank you. Hello, Lisa G at the back.
Hello, everybody else in front of me. I just want to come back to the peer reviewing thing, and I hope you're also going to challenge, when you look at that, you're going to the funding bodies as well. I have a very nice peer review I could show you.
Well, please do.
So, Lisa, just for those of us who don't work in the world, it's how the studies get picked.
It's not
the funding.
It's how you have to get through a peer review process to be funded. Yeah. And you have to get through a peer review process to be published when you've done some research. From a small personal experience, I would suggest that there are some issues in the system.
Okay.
Some issues.
I'm making notes.
Yeah, write that down.
Lisa and the funding.
Who else would like to come in? Hello, in the front row here. George is coming at you with the mic. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Izzy.
Hi, Izzy.
I was just wondering, I've got to admit, I haven't finished your book yet, so I'm really sorry if this is in, towards the end of your book. But with the Euros on at the moment, and just I've, throughout my life, I've seen constant videos and whatever, and all the comments of people just slating women's football, and it's just so annoying. And I just wondered your thoughts, or if you've done any research on women in sport and how they're disadvantaged or discriminated.
I can never quite remember if this made it into the book or not. Well, I don't remember word for word every page, because I did do some research on sport science, but I don't remember if it was in the book. So you might be okay.
There's the playgrounds. There's quite a lot about football in the playgrounds bit. Because
no, that's in the podcast.
Oh, okay. There you go. I'm mixing up my books and my podcast.
Essentially, women are very sports science is one of the worst areas for including women in the research. So we know very, very little about how the female body responds to exercise, how to get the most out of the female body when it comes to exercise, how to deal with injuries. So women are more likely to experience ACL injuries, and that is connected also to the menstrual cycle. And so they are starting to develop training schedules around the menstrual cycle in order to try and mitigate for these kinds of things. There's also stuff about concussion. Women are more likely to experience concussion, and the effects of concussion tend to be worse and last longer. That's for things like football. If you're doing headers, don't do headers. That's basically my takeaway. Men shouldn't do headers either. No one should be doing headers. When I've read the research, I'm just why are they still doing headers? Stop them. And every time I watch anyone play football and do a header, I'm just oh, stop it. So if anyone here plays football and does headers, just stop. But also rugby. And one of, so we're actually doing this in an upcoming episode. So I don't know what Hannah feels about me giving stuff away. Yeah. Okay.
Says yes.
Yeah. There's all sorts of things that could be done to mitigate the problems for women who are experiencing concussion at higher rates to male rugby players. But it's just really simple things for every rugby match between men, there will be a trained medic on the sidelines. There is not one for the female game. And they don't necessarily stop play. They don't notice, there's very little research on how women hit their heads in rugby versus how men hit their heads. So there's these researchers that we interviewed, and they found that while men tend to hit their heads in sort of almost frontwards, in the scrum or whatever. I don't play rugby, so this is probably wrong. But anyway, they hit their heads in this very dramatic way that people notice. Well, women tend to hit their heads by flying backwards and hitting their head like that. And that is partly because women's necks aren't as strong as men's necks. And so when men fall back, it's much easier for them to sort of hold themselves. Whereas women's necks flip back, whack themselves on the head, and then the game carries on because no one really notices what's going on, and you haven't got a medic looking out for it. And then when the women go, this really shocking stuff about how these are athletes who play rugby, but also are literally doing their PhD in concussions on female rugby players. And they've got these special mouth guards. You're not allowed to repeat any of this, although this is online, so this is a disaster. Please listen to the episode. They've got these special mouth guards that are measuring the velocity of the concussion. And these female rugby players, having experienced this, they've got the printout of how bad the head impact was. They can talk about why this matters because this is their PhD, and the doctors are still there, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. And they have to really advocate for themselves. And I'm not going to tell you the even bigger issue that we're going to look into as a result of this, because there's an even more shocking thing. So listen out for that.
Thank you so much, Izzy, for your question. I'm going to go to the question at the back in the black. Hello.
Hi.
What's your name?
I'm Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
I'm working at the moment. I'm trying to do some research.
No, sorry, it is. It's just I didn't know where you were, and I found you now.
She's there.
I'm doing some research at the moment about women in commodity trading, and there are none. And the thing that I kind of keep hitting up is people say, well, we don't want to do anything because we're trading houses and we're really secretive. So I guess my question is, how do you get around that when there's an ostensible other reason for not getting the data to get the data?
Great question.
That is a really good question. And I'm not sure I have a very good answer to it. I'm sorry, because I come across the same barriers all the time where I'm trying to get hold of data and people just won't answer. I don't know if you've been listening to the podcast, but it's basically a litany of us trying to get data and them going, no, go away. Our next episode is on women and privacy, particularly in the context of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and femtech, so like menstrual tracker apps and things, and all kinds of apps that track your location. And we've been trying to speak to these companies, both the ones that collect the data, and bundle it up and sell your data, as well as the apps. And mostly we're just being told, no, go away. Actually, a very funny. Can I tell them the funny bit? A very funny.
Sorry, Hannah.
Sorry, this is a big spoiler, but it's just kind of hilarious. A very funny response we got from two people that Hannah approached was like, thank you so much for inviting us to be on your podcast, but we're just not really interested in participating this time. We're like, that's not what's happening here. We're asking you very detailed journalistic questions about how you handle data and where you get your data and what you do with your data. And they're like, oh, thanks for the invitation to be interviewed. I'm really busy. Yeah. Sorry, so I don't have a good answer. Sometimes, and that was just something I ran into in the book as well. And it was partly sometimes the data just doesn't exist. I remember when I was researching the car stuff, and the academic who I spoke to, I was speaking to him not about cars actually, but about motion sickness, which is much more common in women than in men. And it's one of those things that everyone's known for ages and no one's been interested to find out why. But he started looking into it, and he was talking about how his theory for why motion sickness occurs, and also why it's more common in women, is that motion sickness is related to postural sway. So, and that women's postural sway is slightly different to men's postural sway because our center of gravity is slightly different, because our pelvises are different, our spinal columns are slightly different, our muscle mass distribution is slightly different. And he said the only way to ensure that you wouldn't get motion sickness is to be basically held still. And so that made me think, oh, that's really interesting, because I've always felt like headrests just don't work for me at all. They're not doing anything. They might as well not be there. And so I was like, it'd be really interesting to know whether they've thought about sex differences when it comes to headrests. There's no research. So I couldn't answer that question. So I'm sorry, but you have my sympathy, if that helps.
Well, that's something. Hello, what's your name?
My name's Catherine.
Hi, Catherine.
My question is about kind of the role of us and women in this as well, because what you just were talking about sport really resonated. I grew up playing a lot of sport at quite a high level, and we coached ourselves, we brought our own food. The sex difference is just unbelievable. And we fought for some things at the time, but recently, 15 years after I played for Middlesex cricket, we got contacted to say, we want to bring you to Lords to give everybody a cap. And the outrage I suddenly felt by realising we didn't get given a cap at the time. The men would have played at Lords, been given a cap. We drove ourselves, we paid for ourselves. After I got over the rage, actually, no, I'm not over the rage. Then I thought, never get. I agree. And by the way, I always regret not having pockets. I thought, actually, why did I not have the expectation of getting a cap? What was it that meant that my expectations were so lowered that I accepted so much, even when I was someone that probably fought more than others. And that's really stayed with me of what do we need to be doing more to say this isn't okay.
Catherine, that's the murmur of agreement is the Tortoise equivalent of the Paul Hollywood handshake, so you've done very well there.
What's the Paul Hollywood handshake?
In Bake Off.
Don't watch
He's a man.
I know who Paul Hollywood is from, like, you know, just osmosis. I'm so distracted by Paul Hollywood now. The question was basically what can we do?
What's the expectations? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to have higher expectations. I wanted people to get angry. I wanted people to notice this was going on. Because, you know, I didn't, like, I was way less, what's the word, like proactive, it sounds like, than you were. Until my mid-20s, I wasn't a feminist at all. I hated feminism. And I, you know, had a sort of light bulb moment as a result of reading a book, which basically introduced me to male default in my own head. And I was like, oh my God, I'm picturing men all the time. This is crazy. And how have I not noticed this? So it's really about getting people, I think, to notice is the first stage. And how do you do that? Well, there's this great book you may have heard of called Invisible Women. And I strongly recommend you buy it for everyone. And that's, I mean, yeah, it's basically getting people to notice. I think once people notice, particularly women, you know, I have women writing to me every day telling me about what they're doing as a result of having read the book. And some men, hashtag not all men. I mean, I think that's basically the main thing is helping people to notice it. Because the thing is, like, you can't fix everything. I can't fix everything because there's too much to fix. And I don't know everything, believe it or not. So there are all sorts of areas where there are specialists in that field who need to be the ones addressing it. Sounds like you need to be addressing the caps problem, right? But it's really about that. I think it's about spreading this awareness. And that's kind of one of the things that we sort of try to do, what we're trying to do with the podcast, is like, this wasn't a plan, but we seem to have ended up at the end of most episodes being like, please write a furious email to X person. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because one of the things I'm thinking about is the car crash episode, where I've come up with a cunning plan to force regulators, car manufacturers to start accounting for female bodies in car design, and that is that they need to be transparent. Right, so the tests currently just say, oh, this car is 5 stars. It does not tell you this car is 5 stars tested on a male dummy and on an average male dummy and a dummy which has been shrunk down to the size of Kylie Minogue but is still a male dummy. So it's a male Kylie Minogue, and we put her in the passenger seat, and you'll be grateful. And that's 5 stars, right? It doesn't tell you what 5 stars actually means. And so we have been encouraging everyone, and encourage everyone in this room and everyone online to email Euro NCAP to tell them to be transparent. So, and I really think that that's the first step is forcing all of these companies, all of these organizations to be honest about the data that they're using and what they're doing and what their statistics are, because that really is the first step to changing things. Like, just as a final point, I think I'm right in saying this, but the gender pay gap has improved as a result of companies having to disclose their gender pay gap, because it's embarrassing, right? So transparency is a really hugely important tool in our arsenal.
Thank you so much. So I'm conscious of time and I can see hands going up. So we're going to do a fast and furious round.
I'm very bad
where
at
we're
that.
going to take 3 comments from the floor, and then before we go to, so we're going to go to Steph, and then Steph, if you could pass the mic to Kate behind you, and then we're going to take this lady with the daisies on her dress at the end. Steph, you're in first.
Hi, I'm Steph. Nice to meet you all. Just to go back to the sports point, and also to tie in kind of clothing, pockets, that sort of realm, like sports kit as well, massively designed not for women. Well, the men design it for the women, and it is not fit for purpose. And a lot of it's also white, and a lot of women are trying to get that changed because if they're on their period, they don't necessarily want a white sports kit, and they don't want tiny shorts. They don't want tiny skirts. They want actual kit that's going to protect them, funnily enough. So yeah, I just wanted to raise that as well, because it's not necessarily a data point, but it's anecdotal that, you know, just kit and sports. Exactly.
Real people. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. Pass back to Kate behind you. Oh, there she's got one.
Hello, I'm James's house slave. No, I just wondered, when you talked about the lady who you interviewed for in the podcast, the one in the car crash, and you said it was 100%, you were 100% certain that the reason that she had the pelvic injury was because of the car manufacturer design. And I just wondered, when it came to, I've got a personal interest in this, but more controversial diagnoses, so chronic conditions like CFS, ME, long COVID, ones where it's very hard to measure whether things are in your head or not. And there's a huge bias towards women in these conditions and being seen as neurotic or hysterical, and therefore things are in their head. How would this sort of data-led research that you're doing, do you think about issues that you can't measure and slightly more, I suppose it's a sort of default psychology around the idea that women have this tendency to somatize more than men?
Great question.
It is, but it's not a short, fast and furious one.
We're going to take one more while you think about an answer to Kate's question. Hello. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. I'm a recently retired doctor, and I was stunned, Caroline, to hear your very first point about tranexamic acid not being given to women, because the brand name of tranexamic acid is Ponstan, and in tablet form, it's given to girls for period pain. And I'm just stunned that it's not given as an IV infusion to women. That's amazing. And the other thing I want to say is that lots of your research regarding the different position of women versus men, it applies to people of colour as well. And the research is classically done on white young men. And I remember it's classically done on white young medical students because they want to get the money from the jobs, like to go and spend it down the bar.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Okay.
So only one question to answer, but it's a biggie. Yeah, I mean, I suppose for me, the way to solve that problem is to close the data gap on female bodies in medicine. And the reason for that is twofold. One, women are much more likely to be told, as you said, that physical pain is in their head. They're more likely to be given antidepressants when they're in pain than men are. And that is partly because women are still seen as hysterical and not really believed. It's partly also, though, because there are all sorts of diseases that predominantly affect women that we haven't properly researched. And so we're very bad at diagnosing them. For example, endometriosis, which takes about 8 to 10 years to diagnose. Things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is like an autoimmune disease. Like there are all sorts of autoimmune diseases, and women, I think, make up 80% of those who have an autoimmune disease. So I think if we got much better at studying the female body, we would wipe out a huge part of this problem, because we would be much better at diagnosing women when there is something biologically wrong with them. There was something else I wanted to say, which I've now forgotten. So I'll say the other thing that I thought of, which is that I think part of the problem is also, this isn't so much a gender issue, but that we're very, very bad at understanding how powerful the brain is, and that the brain can manifest physical effects. And so something being psychological in origin doesn't mean it's not real and it's not happening to you. So I think that's another really important part of it. So first of all, closing the data gap so that we stop telling women they're crazy when actually there's something that can be done. And secondly, as a society, stopping saying that something that's psychological is somehow less important, doesn't. And then obviously to do the research into all the diseases that we don't understand, because like some of the diseases that we now recognize as actual diseases and we found the biological basis behind them, we said were just psychological. So I'm not a doctor. I can't tell anyone about ME or any of these other diseases. What I can tell you is that we haven't studied the female body. We know next to nothing about the female immune system. And of course, that was something that we really discovered during this pandemic, which is that women were less likely to die from COVID, but they're more likely to have long COVID, which we don't really know much about because obviously it's a new condition. But the suspicion is that it's another issue of the female overactive immune system. So when I say that, what I mean is that's why women were more likely to be able to fight off COVID, because our immune system like recognizes something as like, oh my God, get to work. Just like women all over, isn't it? But it also means that it can overreact and start attacking itself. And that's basically a very terrible, and I hope there is a doctor here. Just ignore what I just said about autoimmune diseases, but that's like a very sort of lay understanding of the immune function. And we just don't really know much about the female immune function. And in fact, I just want to mention one. I know, I told you it wouldn't be short. I want to mention one study that I always found so fascinating on a number of bases, which is which I reported in Invisible Women, and it was about the differences between the male and the female immune function, essentially. And they took male and female cells, which is very unusual. The vast majority of cell research is done in male cells. But they took male and female cells and they exposed male and female cells to estrogen and then exposed them to a virus. And the female cells were able to use the estrogen to fight off the virus, which was the flu virus, and the male cells were not. And I think that's very interesting and important on a number of bases. Number one, it shows why you really need to start all research from the cell stage in female and male cells, because how many treatments for women that might have worked have we missed out on because they're like, oh, it doesn't work, because they only tested on male cells. Like if they'd only done that study on male cells, they'd be, oh, well, estrogen doesn't do anything. Useless. Move on to the next thing. And the second thing is, if we'd done this study decades ago, you know, what might we have known about the impact of estrogen, and what might we have been able to do in response to this pandemic that just hit us so hard?
Interesting. Thank you so much. I know we're out of time. By my, I mean, we literally are now. I was going to say it's 27 minutes past. It's not. It's 1:30.
I'm sorry.
But I am going to take two really quick questions from people at home, because I've done an atrocious job of remembering that they're there. So Samantha Graham, I'd love to hear your point or question, and Lynn Stagg as well, who are both at home.
Oh my God, are they going to ask?
Yeah, they're going to beam in.
Wow.
I know, right? So whoever comes first, I don't mind, Samantha or Lynn, now is your moment.
They've left, they're like, it's over now.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi there, Liz.
Hi, nice to see you.
And you. Thank you for letting me in. I've been sitting here a little bemused by this conversation, actually, because it's only because I'm old. So I remember similar things and similar research from more than 40 years ago. And there was a very good book called Our Bodies, Ourselves, which came out, which gave most of us a revelation. So I'm very glad we're getting more revelations and more work on this. And I just really wanted to say thank you. It's been very interesting. So no, it wasn't a question. It was just, you know, I'm old, but I'm glad there's still new things happening.
Oh, Lynn, it's lovely to see you. Thanks so much. If we've got Samantha Graham as well, I'd love to hear from you. Hi, Samantha. Oh, hang on, mute. Can we hear Samantha? Try again.
There I am. Yes,
there you go. Brilliant.
Caroline, I'm an absolute fan. Thank you so much. I wondered what the book was where the penny dropped for you, and you were reading it and you noticed your own internal bias.
It was called Feminism and Linguistic Theory.
Ah, very good. Okay, thank you so much.
By Debbie Cameron.
Deborah Cameron, yeah.
Yeah, Deborah Cameron.
She's
it is a classic.
Yeah, she was the one that invented verbal hygiene, right? That was one of her things, Deborah Cameron, I think.
Possibly.
Amazing.
Yes, I didn't remember. I hope she's not watching this.
Amazing evening. Thank you very much to everybody for coming. Thank you, of course, to Caroline for this evening, for this book, and for the amazing podcast series that she's been working with Hannah and Patricia on. Do listen to it. It is in the Tortoise app. If you are a member, you get bonus episodes with additional rage-making things in them and solutions. The whole point of the podcast series is that we're sort of getting beyond just saying how terrible everything is and exploring ways that we can make things better. I hope it isn't another 40 years before we can come back again and start looking at how much better things have got. But it's been a real privilege to listen, and thank you for the work, and to you all for coming, and have a lovely rest of your evening. Thank you so much.